You're listening to All Things 3D, where we talk about the world of fabricating, designing, and capturing in the third dimension.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're sending people that have lots of problems. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. I respect women. Who's better for the gay community and who's better for women than Donald Trump?
Well, I just don't respect her.
I'm going to do great with the African Americans because they know I'm going to bring back jobs.
Black Lives Matter movement, will they be singled out?
Well, you see them marching and you see them calling death to the police a big issue. It's a horrible issue, and we want law and order.
I love the old days. You know what they used to do to guys like that when they were in a place like this? They'd be carried out on a stretcher. I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you. We'll beat the shit out of them.
Listen, you motherfuckers. Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
I will be the greatest jobs president that God ever created. I tell you that. Our country's going to hell. It's going to hell.
Hello.
Morning, everybody. Hi, this is Mike Balzer. Well, it looks like we've got somebody joining us, but, I just showed the trailer from the latest Michael Moore movie, Trumpland. And, as you're probably aware of today, actually a couple days ago, we have a new President-elect Trump. So instead of, for those of us who voted for Hillary Clinton, waiting in our sorrow, what can Donald Trump do for us? But before I start, I wanted to kind of get into something that really bothered me. I was probably very vocal about Hillary Clinton, and I decided to be a little bit political this year, and I created, as some of you are aware of who follow this show, a VR game called Graveyard, but then I called it Graveyard Politics because I added a few things. And even though the sound bites were from Donald Trump himself, the sound bites were from Hillary Clinton, it probably had a more positive view towards Hillary Clinton. However, my app the day after he was elected was suspended. Now, since then, I have put 3 versions because I was, once the election was over, I decided that no reason to continue to keep it up there. So I've removed all the politics, but the sad thing is I still have not received any explanation, but I have not really checked my email today from Google on why it was suspended other than deceptive. And I don't think it was deceptive. The title identified clearly politics. The description identified that there was the drum troll and a few other characters. So I, was it a game? Yes, I think it was a game. However, it had some political overtones. And I also noticed that my Twitter account had been defaced, as well as few things on Facebook. And I got into some heated rhetoric from individuals who felt such things as hanging Obama was okay, and a few other things. And I obviously am very concerned about where we're headed with this, especially how people would react to other individuals. There's been a lot of toxic, can't even say the word. It's been very toxic. And I am just hoping, as you can see already if you're watching the news, that it's continuing. And I'm hoping that somehow we can have some stabilization. I know that a lot of the people that watch this show are more interested in the technology, and how 3D can move us forward. So my goal at this particular point is to see, if Trump moves forward with his agenda and does want to bring manufacturing back home, can 3D play a part, such as personal fabrication? I see that already happening, as you're aware of. We've been coming for 3 years. I personally have done a lot of 3D fabrication, either through myself, through my co-host Chris, who sadly can't join us today, or through Shapeways and some other larger personal fabrication location for my own product, Neodivir Uplay. However, I personally was planning to have it injected molded in China, but I have looked at other avenues. I know that there's a location up in Minnesota, Proto Labs, if I remember correctly, that has these kind of services. The problem is that you're going to pay more, but if we equalize that, that won't be the issue. So we'll have to see where that goes. But first of all, I want to just kind of bring up this article, and I'll just kind of go through these very quickly. This was a problem, and I was hit by it as well. There was a large army of people that trolled other people. Twitter is very well known for this. If you're on the wrong side of something, you can really get it. And obviously, I was a little bit on the wrong side of things. In fact, I feel strongly that I had a DNS attack the night before, I think either Monday or actually on Saturday, because of my blustering feedback to certain individuals. So, and it is something to be very sensitive about. And again, he somewhat enabled this to become even more of an issue. And let's hope, as president now, he rethinks some of these things. I guess we can hope, right? But let's look at some other things. One thing I noticed immediately in the news was Stratasys, and as you can see today, is up. And it has been up all week. In fact, it had been on decline, and I had noticed that. If you can look at this here, it had sharply dropped, but look how much it's gained. I mean, it's literally 3 points since Trump was elected president. And this also carries over to 3D Systems. So notice these increases, and then finally HP. So we're seeing these huge rises in these 3D printing companies. Now, there are probably others out there that I haven't looked at. And I do think that there's a correlation there that since he's talked about bringing manufacturing back, and 3D fabrication is playing a huge part in manufacturing, either from a prototype perspective or even small runs, that they stand to probably profit from this. So that's just at least my opinion. So I went ahead and looked through the Trump website on their infrastructure and what he plans to do, for instance, infrastructure. And, kind of quickly through, you can actually go out there and read these yourself. But essentially, he really wants to push new jobs for construction, steel manufacturing, and bring that back into improving, our tunnels, our airports. And you've heard some of this rhetoric if you've listened to him in his term as president. And I mean, if he starts to move in that direction, obviously we're going to need not only the fabrication process, but the construction process and the design process, which is very important, which includes prototyping. So if he does plan to invest a lot of money, I reached out to a couple of people I've had on the show before. If you remember, we've had Great Ferdini. Other than he taking the election pretty hard himself, he did say if we can push a lot of money into the infrastructure portion, we can probably see some dividends from a personal fabricator perspective. So let's look on to the economy. Obviously, his main point during his time on the stump was, hey, we're going to cut your taxes and we're going to provide you credits so that you can either one, be employed, or two, have incentive to start a new business. And, we've heard this before. And one thing that a lot of people don't remember, or maybe they do and just, forgot it, is that Obama also provided credits and taxes in order to boost the economy after the recession of 2008. So Obama, or actually had done some things similar to that to jumpstart the economy. Obviously, Trump wants to do something similar to that as well. And finally, the last thing is trade. As many of you are aware of, he wanted to isolate us. I mean, I guess that's very simplistic, but essentially he wanted to have a more fair table of, for instance, not signing TPP, retracting the NAFTA agreement, but essentially, in his viewpoint, these were not fair trade agreements and they have not benefited us. So he wants to bring all that back to the table. Some people think that he's not really against world trade. He just thinks that what we have now is unfair. And maybe that's true. Maybe it was very simple to say, hey, if we think about ourselves first and get ourselves squared away, then we can be more competitive worldwide. Again, there's a lot of points on either side of this. We'll see how that goes. It was somewhat disconcerting to last night to see that he's still up to his old habits of tweeting and thinking that these are personal affronts to himself. So hopefully that will change, but more than likely not. So then we have, I wanted to get into looking at some past things. We talked about on a number of occasions about the HP printer. One of the things, it's fairly expensive, but this particular article from the Motley Fool says that it's very important now that they seem to be having a resurgence in the PC market, that they also do the same thing in the 3D fabrication. And again, as just mentioned earlier, their stock has rose, as well as 3D Systems and Stratasys, again, for the process of bringing manufacturing and design back to this country. So this might be a very good thing. Sadly, I won't be able to afford it. And I really wanted to get Chris's viewpoint on all this. As you know, he has been basically a 3D manufacturer. He provides 3D print services for other people that require small manufacturing. He uses, or they use him for providing tooling, as well as even making molds now. So there are a lot of things that personal fabrication can do in order to improve that and make the cost of that less. And it's not just strictly in creating prototypes. But sadly, he's not here. And, we'll see where this all goes. But the choice has been made, and we need to look at how us as 3D fabricators, 3D designers, as far as VR representation, how we can, shall we say, benefit from this, use our services, and help move things forward from that perspective. So let's look on to, let's see where we're at now. Well, actually, I was hoping to have it already, but I did receive an email that identified that my, let's see, what is it? The Daydream Viewer is coming today. So hopefully, if my wife gets a knock at the door, she'll bring it down here, and we might have an unboxing on the show. If not, I will cover it next week. Now, in saying that, if you did not buy a 3D viewer, you can get the Daydream app if you've got an Android phone, and I will show you a little bit later how to circumvent using Daydream on, let's say, cardboard or your own viewer. Not very hard. The key is the developer mode, and I will get to that a little bit later. I was a little surprised because I thought, oh, well, I'm going to be disappointed. If you remember, the Daydream Viewer uses NFC to determine when it's connected to the Pixel phone. And if it does not see that, then it tells you that, I'm sorry, I can't launch the Dreamer launcher, or excuse me, the Daydream launcher, because I don't see a compatible Daydream Viewer. But there is a way around that, and I was able to use my NeoDVR Uplay in order to actually look through a lot of the content that's now available, and it's pretty cool. I was really impressed, and even though I don't have the controller, I was able to use an old Galaxy S4 as my hand controller, so I was able to actually experience what it's like when the controller actually comes, and I think it's pretty effective personally. It's a low cost and very interesting way to interactive, much better in my opinion than the Gear VR. And as you know, I'm opposed to Oculus and Samsung because I had a Note 7, and I agree there's a recall. There are problems with it, but some of us do understand the concerns and are able to adapt to it. And as a developer, I think that was very unfair on Oculus to basically brick my Gear VR. And so I'm not a big fan of Google, sort of, other than they suspended my app. So I'm really not in anybody's camp anymore. I guess I have to find my own way somewhere. All right, well, let's look at a couple other things in the news. Where are we at? So I thought this was kind of interesting. They say that 3D fabrication, 3D printing, 3D design has come of age if it starts to wind up as being part of a plot point. I guess there's a new show called Pure Genius on CBS Drama. I have not seen it. I should have had a trailer ready. I don't. But essentially, they will show, or the use of it as far as working, I guess, at State University, but essentially utilizing in their plot line the usage of 3D for heart modeling. And let me shut that on. And I thought that was very interesting. And I have another story in 3D in medicine about somebody, an engineer, who had his heart fabricated so he could design a sleeve in order to correct a problem that he has. So we're seeing a lot of, and as you know, with my own wife and her 3D printing her skull, that we're seeing a lot of I would say diagnosis, but benefiting from the ability to process or manufacture things. So, so here we go. Here's a little video showing the process, and obviously there's no sound. But the whole point is, in this particular article, is that we're seeing the usage of 3D fabrication, VR, as plot points in a lot of our TV series. So, as I said, I guess this stuff is coming of age, and more people are starting to see that. All right, well, let me move into the next item. And since Chris isn't with me, I guess we'll get through this really quick. So if you're a Sketchfab user, aficionado, fan, they have teamed up with Unity. And if you remember, Unity 3D, I've talked about it before on the show, is a tool to allow you to create games or visualizations. It's not necessarily for games. In fact, I've used it for visualization. But essentially, you can drag and drop 3D objects, audio, so forth. And that's the engine that I use to create Graveyard. And essentially create a game, upload it for Android, iOS, Windows, Mac. It's basically available on many platforms. But now they've teamed up with Sketchfab, so now you can export portions of your Unity build, or maybe all of it, directly to Sketchfab. And so that way you can immediately have a model that can be viewed and rotated within Sketchfab. So I thought that was kind of neat. I downloaded the exporter, but I have not actually tried it yet. And as you know, Sketchfab is going to be a big fan of WebVR as well as WebGL, as they are already. So this could be a very important move. The good thing about Unity is that you have to concentrate on low poly objects, which obviously you can, even though you can import into Sketchfab very high poly models, it's best to go with low poly. They work better. In fact, I've been told on occasion to minimize the number of vertices in my models. So this could be a good location to work with. And we'll play this right here. And I think, I do not know if this came from Unity. I think it did. So this is kind of the idea. You build a model, bring it into Unity, and then export it. Now, I don't know if it takes the lighting. I'll have to play with it a little bit more, but it's kind of cool. Here's another example of it, which, in my opinion, probably provides a better, in my opinion, use. You can export a ton of vertices, a full land, and then bring that in, as you can see there. So kind of neat. So I look forward to playing with that. Maybe I'll export part of my Graveyard to it up on the Sketchfab. So I'll send a link out, see if I do that, and then you guys can, and then I'll talk a little bit more about it next week. All right, let's move on to the next item. So as I talked about 3D message already, there was an engineer who decided, I guess he suffers from Marfan syndrome, which is a disorder of the body's connective tissue. In his case, the aorta. And the problem with it is that the muscular structure, or the aorta itself, needs to remain firm so that it doesn't expand and contract. In his case, it seems to expand. So even though this could be a deadly disease, he had his heart, obviously, I think it's probably an MRI, then converted into a model, as he shows there. And then from there, he was able to design this sheath to fit around his aorta. And they were able to put it in there. And what that will do is minimize the aorta from expanding. So I thought that's very cool. And again, this is an individual who's taken his engineering skills and working with two doctors and able to create this in order to obviously more than likely save his life or at least lengthen his life. So again, another application. A less traumatic or dramatic way of using it. If you remember, we talked about basically a young adult who decided, I guess, in high school to create his own, set of Visalign, as they're called, but I guess they don't use that term here because it's trademarked. But essentially, to do something similar to that. And there is a company now who's now going to provide this service, and you can go to a dentist and get the scans done and then send the scans to them, or they'll send you an impression plate. You send them an impression, they'll do the rest of the scanning, and then they'll create these 3D fabricated, basically Invisalign with tool sets to help straighten your teeth. And as you can see here, the pricing is very reasonable. Now, keep in mind, that does seem like a lot, but my wife just had Invisalign done, and it was like close to $6,000 to $7,000. So this is a dramatic difference in price. Now, is it as effective? I don't know yet, but the fact is, again, we're seeing individualized services at a much less cost without obviously bringing in Chinese or lower labor in order to do that, but just being smart, I think, is very significant. And again, the personalized functionality of providing scanning and 3D fabrication. The material, if you go back up, they kind of identify it's a BPA type material. I do know, depending on the type of printer they're using, that has already been available. In fact, some of them use it. If you remember, if you've been following me for some time, I worked with a local dentist, to actually create my own filling, and realized I'm glad that I didn't go into dentistry because it's not so easy. I guess if you've been doing it for a while, it could be. But one of the things I noticed, because I used my Form 1, is that not only did it take longer, the quality wasn't as good as if it were being milled, which is what a lot of dentists use. And we had actually compared that on the show. Just go back into our archives and look for the interview with Dr. Kopp, where we actually go through the whole process of what tools I used to design. I think I used 3D Mixer and a couple other tools in order to create my own filling. We almost went through with it, except the person who was actually going to create the filling, his mother had gotten sick. I'm kind of glad, because it would have been a very costly filling, because it would have had to been done in gold, and I decided not to go that direction. So if you need something like this, it is far cheaper. And as we found out, insurance doesn't cover all that. If you have dental insurance, you'll find that it doesn't really cover this unless you pay extra for that kind of service. And so a lot of what we paid was out of pocket. All right, let's move on to the next item. So this is something from my friends over at Occipital. They have come out with another app, and I will probably do a little demo next week. But essentially, they have been working, and I have been working with them, using their 3D scanner and a tablet to scan a room and then bring this in. Now, that has been done in the past. They've had a free app available for their scanner for some time. But if you can now take this 3D model and then convert that into a floor plan, that is a big shift in the way that they've done things in the past. So I'm not exactly sure the process. Again, I will test the app as soon as I get it, and we'll see what this means. But again, as you know, I've covered them. I've designed my own 3D scan app for this particular product, as well as using it for an upcoming product that I'll talk about in an upcoming show, and that is using the iPhone 7 with the Structure app. I'm refining their algorithms to make the VR experience, because remember, we're using this sensor here to provide inside-out positional tracking. The problem with it, though, is if you do not, let's say, look at the floor, compare its distance, look at the ceiling, compare its distance, initially, it kind of gets messed up a little bit if you look up, because it doesn't really understand that that's up per se. So I'm going to build a little bit more intelligence in there so that if you rotate past a certain degree, it knows that you're looking up, and to ignore that information. And then once you come back, again, because they're using the multi-axis gyro, so I'll just be able to read that information and basically provide a little bit more intelligence on how the sensor is used. And I'm hoping to have something in prototype form in the next couple of weeks that I'll demonstrate. The fact is that this is the only positional tracker that's available for iOS, as I pointed out before. I think there's going to be a lot of positive. I do know that they just came out with a development kit using the Hamido headset. And as you know, I have been working on a version of this here that has a plate to hold the structure sensor. I do know that there is work being done in Android as well. So if you're interested in it, that is available. However, as you know, and I know, there is competition from other people. Windows is planning to put out $300 positional tracking headsets, but they require a PC. The importance of that is that, from what I have been reading, it will be incorporating a lot of the the holodeck. Geez, can't even remember the name now. Well, their headset that they have been prominently shown, that's $3,000. The inside-out tracking system seems to be already at a point that they can put it in other devices. So some of the other OEM devices like HP, Lenovo will have a version, they say, in about the $300 price range. So I'm pretty excited about that. As you know as well, Qualcomm will have a reference headset mobile unit that will have also some type of inside out. And then let's not forget Google, with their Tango series of sensors, also provides something similar to this. So there is going to be a lot of competition. And as you know already, HTC has room positional tracking. And so there's a few other companies that are also looking into this. All right, so let's move on actually into the VR section itself. This is the PMax 4K VR headset. So I read this article and I said, well, this is very intriguing, but what is missing out of this? And let me go out to their actual website, and you can come back to that. It'll be in my show notes. First of all, it's $349, and if you want to buy it at GearBest, if you go out to AliExpress or something like that, you'll see it's between $399 and $450. But if you're interested in it, contact me. I have a source that I use for a lot of my VR stuff in China that can actually honor the price of $350. So if you're not confident about GearBest, and I think she can get it to you in about half the time that they're suggesting for about the same price. So if you're interested in that, I will contact my friend Amy, and she can get you one of these as well. On that note, I have purchased one, should have it by Thursday of next week to show off next Friday. Some of the things that I am interested in or concerned if you review, one, many of these Chinese headsets do not have Oculus, what do you want to call it, Rift CV, or the consumer version compatibility. They have Oculus 2 or DK2 compatibility. But the other thing that some people are missing is that they have the OpenVR drivers, which means they'll be able to use anything that's on the Steam VR system that is OpenVR compatible. And that's not everything, but there seems to be a larger amount of VR stuff in the Steam store that is OpenVR compatible. If you remember, the OSVR headset also applies the OpenVR process to their drivers. So we may see more of other markets entering VR content that is basically open. With that being the case, what makes this different? Obviously, it is the 4K resolution is 3860 by 21, or 38, what's that? Yeah, 3860 by, no, I'm saying that wrong. 3840 by 2160, and essentially 4K, and which means that you'll have essentially 1080p per eye, or in this case 1920 by 2160 per eye. and that is about the highest resolution that is possible right now. What is not identified is actually how large the screen is. But the fact is that it uses 53 millimeter lenses, very similar to what's being used in HTC Vive. Sounds very interesting, obviously interesting enough that I've purchased one. But the other thing is what is not identified, and from what I can gather, this is not an AMOLED screen. This is an LCD screen. Now, they do identify it as being a low latency LCD screen, but I don't know specifically if what that actually means. I do know LCD just by its nature is not low latency. Now it might be minimized. I have worked with a couple of 2K screens that are LCD, as well as working with the LG G5, which is an LCD screen, and the iPhone, which is an LG or a IPS LCD screen. And I personally do not have a lot of issues with it. If you're not using fast motion material, let's say you're just using this to look at spherical 360s or models, I don't see that being a huge issue with this. One of the things that I have noticed is that you do get some light leakage because LCD requires a backlighting system, but it's not that significant. And IPS or some of these, one of the pluses of LCD is that you're actually using an RGB subpixel. So your actual density, now imagine at 4K, is literally 1-for-1. So that's a huge benefit. And so, I'm optimistic that the quality of this will be very good. But the other thing to keep in mind, and I think they say it'll be rated at 60 hertz, but it'll have some special boost mode, more like probably something like what's the Sony PlayStation VR system is using. It also is at 60, but they have a interpolation to 120, as well as a direct drive at 120 hertz refresh rate. They may be doing something like that there. So it won't be a true 120, but 60 seems to be the case. But again, for low motion type stuff, I think this will be more than adequate. I think the higher resolution will more than make up for that. So I'm really interested in looking at it. Now, keep in mind, 4K means 4 times the pixels that you've got to push from your computer. So that right there will create some problems. In fact, he did some benchmarks here to show what he can actually push out of this. As you can see here, and I guess 78 frames and 41 frames here. So when you're pushing that many pixels, you're obviously going to see a decrease in performance. But as you know, the NVIDIA card, and let's not forget the cards from, I want to say Radeon, but geez, I've already forgotten the name of the company. I apologize for that. However, there are cards out there that have improved immensely. For instance, the 1070, the 1080 series that will be able to push out 4K very effectively. So I don't think that's a real issue. The fact is that this thing is like half the price of an Oculus or an HTC. Also indicates that there's some promise there. I do know that some of the things I've worked with the, what's it called? The Discovery, can't think of the actual term for it now, but using the new Steam engine, you have the ability to actually do photorealistic models, and I could see this being very beneficial to it. In fact, it may actually show some of the glaring obvious deficiencies in some of the models if they don't have high enough texture maps. So I'm looking for that. Again, I will report about this next week. I probably plan to take it apart a little bit. I do want to know exactly who the manufacturers of the screen that's being used in it. I have my theories, but I won't mention that until I actually prove it one way or another. Okay, so if you're interested in something like this, let me know. Send me a message, or identify it in the show notes, or not show notes, the comments area of the YouTube video, and I will email you the contact that I will be getting it from. She's very reliable, very trustworthy. I use her all the time, and she's never let me down. All right, on to the next item. Well, Gear Best again. If you own an HTC Vive, or you've been thinking about it, but you're asking yourself, what good is a device that you can walk around if you still have an umbilical cord? Well, if you hurry, because I have a feeling they're gone now, but since HTC Vive is a Taiwanese company, if I remember correctly, this was only available overseas. Even though you could order it, you would have to obviously pay for the shipping. And a lot of times shipping can be not only costly, but lengthy. Again, Amy, for about $15, will send it in a week. So keep that in mind too for the other product we just talked about. But if you do have an HTC Vive, at $220, it seems like a no-brainer. This provides a very low latency wireless system. You have a transmitter module that you put on your computer, and then you have a receiver here, and then back here is a battery pack. The battery pack provides about an hour and a half of usage, but the most important thing is it powers the whole unit for about an hour and a half. And let's play this little video here. You have no wires. So imagine the freedom of being able to walk around, move quickly. Some of the things that were identified with it is that they stayed in place, so you didn't have to worry about falling off. I also see that because, you know, in my own experience in design, you've got these headsets that are built on your face, and they're heavy. I mean, there's no two ways about it. They're not lightweight. And some companies have decided to balance that out with, I'll play that again, balance that out with some weight on the back. So I think this is very appropriate. It's a design that I've taken with my own head strap for my Uplay units, that you can put an external battery on the back, and it provides two functions. One, a battery. Two, it provides counterweighting. So I think that actually will help in the long run, help minimize or balance the weight on your face. So I look forward to trying this out. I guess I'm going to have to get an HTC Vive after all. But they're in limited quantity, so keep that in mind. Is that, I can't remember, but if you go ahead and go out there right now and pre-order, more than likely you're already aware of this if you do have an HTC Vive. But if the reason you didn't buy an HTC Vive is you didn't want that cord, this could be a very interesting solution. I do know there are other companies that are making something similar to this. So this may not be the only one, but it is available now and actually adds more credence to buying a HTC Vive. Okay, so let's move on, and here's actually the website for, and as you can see, it's in Chinese, but we'll translate it. So there you go. In fact, I'm pretty sure that was Mandarin. So TPCast 5 wireless kit. So essentially, it's a unit that sits on top. So here's your transmitter unit. There's the actual transmitter, and then here's the power supply, as you notice, with a pouch on the back of the headset. They are supposedly working on a higher wattage version of this, or ampere hour battery, to provide a longer experience. But, you know, I think that's still pretty cool, and look forward to actually seeing it and maybe trying it out myself. Okay, well, I think that's about it. Let me get into a couple of items that I wanted to show. If you are interested in playing with, especially if you have a Pixel or a Pixel XL, and if I remember correctly, if you buy this from Google, you get a Daydream Viewer, so it probably is meaningless to you. But if you've got a, let's say, an Nexus 6P and want to play with this, there's a couple of places, I'll make sure it's in the show notes, there's a couple of places out there that will allow you to download the APK. I have tested on the 6P. It does work. Obviously, I've tested it on the Pixel XL here. It does work. In fact, you can actually just go out to the Google App Store and get it for your Pixel XL. But if you don't have your Daydream Viewer, like I said, mine should be here today. Yeah, obviously the show's almost over, and I don't have mine yet. So that should tell you something. So with that being the case, I was able to download it, but let me show you how to actually look at materials without having the headset. So if you go to settings, and if you can see that, if you notice there's developer options. So one of the things that you can do is, and I just said enable SDK library, so it loads them beforehand. So if you're using any of the, I don't know if Unity uses this, but I do know that if you're designing it from scratch using the Google SDK, this will load it beforehand so that it's already available, and also can minimize the size of your actual applications because the SDK is already loaded. So the other thing that I checked was skip VR early screens. Now that one is the important one, because if you skip the early screens, you also bypass the screen that prevents you from using it if you don't have the Daydream Viewer. So that was the big trick. So go ahead and do that. The other thing is this controller emulator device. If you have an old, for instance, I've got a Galaxy S4, but if you've got an old phone that's, I don't know if it's limited to Marshmallow. Let's say Marshmallow or even Nougat. Let's say Marshmallow. If you got a phone that handles Marshmallow, you can load the developer controller app and turn any of these smaller phones, maybe a larger phone, into a Bluetooth Daydream controller, which is what I've been doing in order to develop my Graveyard app. And it works quite well. Well, most of the time it works quite well. I think the Galaxy S4 doesn't have the best gyro, so it drifts probably more than, for instance, using the Nexus 6. But the Nexus 6 is almost twice its size. So it's not really good for a controller, but if you've got an old phone, you might want to try it out. The new version of the developer controller app does Bluetooth now. So if you pair the devices beforehand, it will show up here. Just select it, and then it can be pretended. Now, did I bring it? Yes, I did. So here's my S4. And let me go ahead and, there we go. So there's the app itself. So I'm going to bring up something in the, let's see, there should be, there we go, there's a little symbol down here. There you go. So this is what the Daydream Viewer looks like. Now notice how the screen kind of shifts. I don't know if you're noticing that. That is the algorithm that compensates for the movement as you move around. Now notice it's like two independent frames. And I have found, especially in Graveyard, and I've had to make some tweaks last night, that this new version, and I think it's only since 7.1 that we're seeing this pronounced bouncing in frames, that it can really be a deficit if you're really pushing the processor and GPU in your phone. And I noticed an earlier, so I've done some camera clipping because basically, if you remember, if you've seen my earlier demonstrations of Graveyard, it's dark, there's a lot of fog. So I've now clipped the cameras so it doesn't, and plus modified the occlusion, so we don't see any of the stuff in the background, so it kind of shuts it off. So I've noticed some improvements already in a new version, which I can actually probably show in doing so. So the other thing is, I've learned how to actually use this. So let me go out. Oh, here we go. If you hold down the bottom button, which you can't see here, but if you hold down the bottom button on your controller for any length of time, it will reposition your screen so that it's facing whatever you're looking at, and it also repositions the controller itself. So essentially, you just use the gyro, and it kind of waves around, and then you can select something. I'll go ahead and select this. You just kind of double tap on something, and it shifts to it. There we go. So this is a little, I guess, museum they created. It is very, very immersive. Again, only because of my Uplay. We'll see how this will compare to the Daydream Viewer. But one of the things that, at least to me, the Uplay, and I know I keep talking about it, and you're probably saying, well, where is it then? You know, you've been talking about it for months now. Well, I'm still refining it. The big lenses, because it literally envelops your entire eye, gives you the feeling that you're just wearing a pair of glasses. And even though the sides are still open a little bit, because the lenses are so large, it makes you feel like you're wearing glasses and your world has just changed. So it's very, in my opinion, very immersive. But you have to ensure that you balance it correctly, because essentially you still have a phone weight that's resting on the bridge of your nose. I've tried to minimize that by putting some cushion on the top of the frame portion here, which you can see, well, probably not, but as well as some nose pieces. So let's try one of these here. Let's double click on this here. Yeah. And essentially you can use the pad to shift through things. There we go. So then it puts it on the wall and then you can view it. Now keep in mind, there is no positional tracking, so you're in a fixed position. You don't actually have the ability to move back and forth with the controller. I found that very effective in Graveyard, and I really liked it as far as being able to move around. I felt like I was on like a Segway. I didn't find, at least to me, but I'm probably immune to motion sickness by now. So I felt it was actually kind of fun. In fact, I think I'm going to create something where you basically get on a Segway and get off of it, and then use positional tracking for smaller areas, but use the Segway type vehicle to traverse larger areas or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Segway. So there you go. And then if you press on the home button, which is the bottom button on this, it takes you back to the main menu. And then if you notice the vote, that was previous versions of Graveyard Politics. So here's another one that, I don't know, I don't know if it actually ran. There's like a go-kart one that's free. That's actually pretty cool. It uses the controller again, but you turn it sideways and it's kind of like a steering wheel. So I guess some people will probably build something so that you can mount that either with Velcro or something. So I don't know if we're running here or not. I have noticed that some of these, if depending on what flag you set up, will not run in because I'm using the casting device, are not visible. And you may have noticed that if you've been following this show. All right, well, that doesn't seem to be working, so I'll drop out of that. Let's see if one of these others, let's try the YouTube. This is kind of neat. Essentially, it is a VR view of YouTube. It actually works quite well. Let's see, let's try this one here. So it actually launches the 360 material and then takes it over. So I was quite impressed. Obviously, there's been a lot of Google material before, but I found another level of immersion. The fact is that you don't have to put the device in, take it out all the time, I think is another big plus. But keep in mind, this is only available for the Pixel XL. Even though you can get the 6P to work with it, I have found the performance, since it only uses a Snapdragon 810, to be less, but not that bad, especially for a lot of the this particular material from the Google Daydream store. But yes, currently there's only the Pixel XL. Hopefully there'll be other manufacturers. There we go. Ooh. And it is very immersive. And I can see this providing more opportunities. Okay, so let's jump out of that. Let's move back to my main screen. And we'll look at one more thing, and that's what's going on in the 3D fabrication world. We're almost done with this year. And keep in mind, if you're a follower, then I think I have mentioned it, I am moving to Oregon. We have sold our house, and we are packing up. We're hoping to be in Oregon before the end of the year or beginning of next year. So we'll be close to Portland. I think we'll be, no, actually we'll be in Portland, but we'll be in one of the suburbs in the southwest side of it. Siobhan, my wife, wanted trees, and we're going to have plenty of them. In fact, the house we're buying has this nice little nook that's like in the middle of it. So I'm hoping that it makes her very happy. As you know, she's gone through a lot in the last years, and she deserves a break. So, you know, it's going to be a lot of work on my part. I've got a lot of junk, but it's, I think in the long run, well worth it. Okay, so what do we got? November 30th, we've got the show in Shanghai and then Germany, and then we come back to the United States in Pasadena. And this is the one that Chris goes to, I think, on a regular basis. So he may or may not be there. And then we have another show in San Diego, Inside 3D Printing, which has been something that's been ongoing for years, on December 14th and 15th. I have a feeling we're going to see a little bit of a resurgence in these particular areas, and obviously a little bit more interest. Okay, well, that's it for me. I hope it wasn't too much of a downer, or for those of you, depending on your political viewpoints, it may have angered you, or you might see it as a plus. You know, the way I look at it now, we're going to have to hope for the best. And, you know, we as the people should hold our elected officials to their oaths and what they say. And we need to make sure that we work with our elected officials to ensure that that's the case. So if there's something you don't like, you still have the right as a citizen to stand out and say what you'd like. For those of you out there who are Bernie fans, I just heard today before I came on the show that he has announced that he will be running in 2020. So there is some positives of all of this. Oh, well, I'm going to leave this on a positive note. Hey, thank you, my 2 viewers out there. We actually had 3 today. We actually had someone who had clicked on the link and then dropped out of it. So sadly, I didn't have anybody to have a conversation with today, but that made the show go a lot faster than normal. We were getting out of here in less than an hour, and oh well. So thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you next week. And hopefully Chris will be with us. And I'm going to be looking at trying to get more co-hosts besides Chris to fill in the gaps so that you just don't have to listen to me. But thank you. We'll probably have 1 or 2 more shows before the end of the year, and then I'll probably take another break. And my next show in the beginning of the year will be in a brand new place. Who knows? Maybe I'll do it all outdoors this time. No green screen, no nothing. So, bye.